Bitcoin is a highly volatile asset, but that doesn't mean it's a risky investment. So to understand this, we have to understand the difference between volatility and risk. So volatility in an investment basically just means the velocity by which the price moves. So it can move up or down, but the volatility just means the swings in the shorter term are larger up and down, right? A stock could be, have 100% volatility, but still appreciate at an average of 30% a year. In the same way, it could also decrease by an average of 30% a year. Risk is some inherent, accepted negative outcome potential of permanent loss of capital if you're talking about risk in terms of an investment. So in terms of Bitcoin, we have to differentiate volatility from risk, right? The volatility just means that the price moves at great speed up and down, which is the case with Bitcoin because it's a relatively small asset class when you compare it to something like bonds, real estate, and stocks. And so big moves and like big players coming in and out can affect the price in the short term. But risk, right? We have to compare the risk of Bitcoin to other traditional investments or just holding your money in fiat. So Bitcoin is money, right? And by buying Bitcoin, what are you doing? You're exchanging fiat currency or government issued currency that loses a percentage of its value every year and is designed to trend towards zero in value. You're exchanging that money for Bitcoin, which is a type of money, a monetary network that is decentralized, permissionless. No one can control it. No one can manipulate it, right? You might accept some other types of risk, but I would argue that the risky thing is to own absolutely zero, right? And the reason I say that is there's never been another opportunity like this to, like I said, exchange units of money printed at no cost, right? There's no physical cost or energy to print dollars, but there is energy to mine Bitcoin. So sure, you can still accept some amount of risk, right? People have been talking about quantum computing as a potential risk. I mean, I would argue that it's all theoretical, right? And it's just saying, 5 to 10 years, this theoretical computer that could exist could pose a threat to old Bitcoin addresses that don't have some kind of quantum proof, protocol. And I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it does kind of just feel like the next FUD cycle about Bitcoin. The next Bitcoin is bad for the environment. Bitcoin is too risky, whatever the narrative is about Bitcoin. It, just feels to me, at least from my point of view, feels like just the next of many, attack vectors on Bitcoin. And you can accept that as a risk, but if you accept that as a risk, then you can still adjust your risk tolerance to Bitcoin to reflect that, right? Most people just see it as volatile, right? Someone told them it was volatile. Someone told them it was risky. They confuse volatility and risk. They think they're one and the same, so they don't touch it at all. But even if you see some potential risks, which even if they are theoretical, you still shouldn't own zero Bitcoin, right? That's the cool part about it. You can put $5 a week into Bitcoin, right? You can just skip the Starbucks, make your coffee at home, use that to buy Bitcoin, right? That's why I say it's so much riskier to just ignore it completely, because you're missing out on the opportunity to adopt a form of money before most people understand how that money works and adopt it in their own lives, right? That's why it doesn't even, how do I say this? The risk of Bitcoin going to zero is just crazy when you think about what that really means, right? For Bitcoin to go to zero, that would mean people would no longer want to exchange dollars for money that no one can create more of from now until the end of time. Like, it doesn't really make sense, right? When you understand that Bitcoin is money, and by exchanging dollars for Bitcoin, you are just transferring your savings from one form of money to another form of money, right? It's not a stock, right? Bitcoin isn't a stock that you buy and try to sell later on for more dollars, right? It is money. So that's why, as a Bitcoiner, right, when you hear people saying Bitcoin will go to zero, like, I just can't imagine a future where people don't want to exchange pieces of paper, quote unquote. Digital dollars, I would argue, are also pieces of paper because they're created for free. They don't require any effort to produce. I just can't imagine a future where people will want to stop exchanging pieces of paper for Bitcoin, the hardest form of money to ever exist. Right? So, like, what's the risk of that? Again, like I said, there are still these existential risks. There's the risk of, overregulation, which is still a far-fetched risk because the amount of regulation that would have to happen for people to crack down on people running software on their computers, like, that's pretty unfeasible, right? The risk of quantum computing, again, like I said, it's just this completely theoretical thing that exists in the future. And you could subscribe to that, sure, but you have to, like, just think of, like, the percentage chance of quantum computing being able to break Bitcoin's cryptography. And then I would just think, like, the biggest risk is just, like, the lack of education and understanding. And that's why I make these videos talking about stuff like this. So, yep, that's about it for this video. I definitely just, like, I don't know, feel like I'm repeating some of the points, but I just feel like it's so important to come across. And that's just the main point of this video, understanding the difference between volatility and risk. I could have, gone more into those specific terms and, like, what they mean in the context of Bitcoin, but I think you get the idea from watching this. So, yeah, that's about it. I'll see you in the next one. As always, together, let's work, save, and build a brighter future with Bitcoin.